Everybody, and welcome to this week's HackerKast, brought to you by White Hat Security. My name is Jeremiah Grossman, and I am the founder of White Hat Security, and I'm here, as always, with Robert Snake Hansen.
Hello.
Out of Austin. And he's in Austin because, you know, Houston is kind of underwater right now. So it's kind of a serious environment.
It is. One of our co-founders, his house is underwater.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Bill Pennington. You should check out his feed. It's pretty crazy.
Oh, man. Okay. Yeah. All right. So today we're going to talk about web security, current events, all kinds of cool stuff happening this week. So we're going to kind of condense it down to try to help people figure out what's going on out there. The first one on the list is something called the Moose router worm. This is something Robert and I have been talking about for a long, long time. So what's interesting about this one?
Yeah, so if you're familiar with something called the Internet Census Project, which was sponsored by Anonymous, basically they scan the entire internet looking for open routers that have default passwords of like password 12345 and like admin or whatever. And that's all they did. They just broke in with default credentials, and they were able to compromise 1.2 million networks. So this is very similar to that, except instead of using it for scanning the internet, the moose worm tries to hijack social profiles and like get them to click on things and like create profiles and basically just kind of make a mess out of people's accounts for the purpose probably of click fraud or account takeovers or something. It's a little unclear.
So these are routers, like DSL routers and things like that. And okay, I know I'm regret asking this question, but why is any of those interfaces remotely accessible, like from the internet? Is that the vulnerability?
No, it's not technically the vulnerability. The vulnerability is the default cred. But I agree. It's very weird to me that these things are publicly accessible without some super strong authentication, like some very large certificate and locked down to IP addresses of known ranges of things that AT&T owns or Verizon owns or whatever, but or Comcast. But yeah, no. It is basically, once you compromise this one machine, you don't just compromise the router. You actually compromise the entire network it sits behind, which is really bad for obvious reasons. But the worst part from my perspective is that I don't remember a single time I've ever heard of anyone doing router forensics. Not once.
Yeah. So that actually brings up a good point. I mean, when you own the home user's network via the router, it's very hard to recover this stuff. So is there any indication about what the bad guys are doing on the router? Is it just updating DNS settings, or are they mucking with the firmware?
In this case, it doesn't seem like they are mucking with the firmware. They're just rewriting either routes or changing DNS. So that's actually very hard to see, kind of. I mean, it's easy to test if you already know it's something you should test for, but if you don't know what you're looking for, you're not going to accidentally see it. So I think the only way people are finding out is they are saying things like, I didn't like that, or whatever. So those type of signals are actually very hard to figure out exactly what happened.
And what is the number of the routers again? It's like reported like 1 million of them available, but how many were hacked?
Yeah, we don't know that number, but in the Internet Census Project, it was 1.2 million. So it's going to probably be a little less than that, but not by a whole lot, because I don't think a whole lot of people. One of the things about the Internet Census Project is after the bad guy or whatever he was done, he basically broke back into all of the same routers and removed everything he had just done. So he didn't change the passwords. He didn't do anything to those routers. They're just the same as they were when he got there. So theoretically, it could be almost exactly the same number, 1.2 million.
Wow, that's a crazy amount of systems and bandwidth. I mean, imagine they could point everybody's bandwidth at a singular target. I don't know if anybody could withstand that amount of load.
Yeah, absolutely not.
All right, so we got insecure routers. That's all nice, and I guess people should, if they know. I mean, we're going to be talking to the wrong people here, through this podcast or this video cast. But I mean, is it possible to change their passwords? I guess so, if people knew to look. I mean, this is really bad form on the part of the router manufacturers.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's bad design. I mean, having it accessible from the internal network makes a lot of sense for obvious reasons, from RFC 1918 internal address space or whatever. Yeah. Or connected through a console cable or something like that, or even to a lesser extent through wireless. I've seen that as well, but directly publicly accessible on the internet is a pretty bad idea.
Yeah. All right. So moving along into more hacking, and this one This one's going to get a few people into trouble here, just to say the least. This is where a website called Adult Friend Finder. Many people are going to be familiar with this site, but Adult Friend Finder.
What is it? What is it, Jer?
I guess when adults want to find friends. Anyway, it's a very adult-oriented website, and they were compromised, and a lot of their users' personal information and preferences were leaked out of the system and got into the hands of the bad guys. So Robert, what's going on here? What are the details here?
Yeah, so I actually got my hand on the dumps. There's a handful of them. It's pretty big. It's about 300 megs fully uncompressed. There's several interesting things about the data. One, this is definitely not a complete dump, the one that they published on the internet. So they didn't include things like passwords. And for most of the users, they didn't include information about their preferences or even their username, just their email address, which, keep in mind, their email address is a pretty bad leak. So I did some very simple tests, and of course I found tons of .mil and .gov in there and all kinds of stuff. So on a few of the records, you could get things like their date of birth, their zip code, their IP address, their username, their email address, and a few other tidbits about their preferences, which is definitely enough to do bad things. Now, one other thing about the data that in the quick parse of looking through it, there wasn't a single obviously named woman profile. It was all men. So keep in mind the purpose of this particular hack was to try to blackmail people. So maybe they had better luck with men, and that's why they dumped it.
Huh. Okay, so I guess we're probably going to see a lot more extortion on this. And when I wonder about these adult entertainment websites, man, when you give up your customer list, I mean, doesn't that speak to the viability of the business? I mean, those customers are gone. I mean, and there's a lot more people who are just not going to sign up. I mean, this is probably, like, for them, probably the worst of the worst that a hack attack could do.
Now, I actually am not. Well, I think what this might do is it might hurt the industry as a whole. I think that definitely could happen. But I think companies like Adult Friend Finder, and then looking through the data, it appears that they own lots and lots of websites. So they have them all in one master big database. But they could theoretically rebrand pretty quickly. I don't know what the cost associated with doing a complete rebrand would cost, but they already have enough brands that they might be able to shift their focus and their finances into a different direction.
Huh. Yeah, just imagine, like, everybody that's on Friend Finder who didn't get their data compromised are probably scrambling at this point going, how do I delete what's there?
Probably won't help.
All right, so we got, so this is Moose Router Room, we got Adult Friend Finder. Let's move on to some privacy-oriented stuff, specifically in the browser. So there was a story that came out earlier this week, maybe late last week, that says, so this is something Mozilla and Firefox been working on for a while. It's something called suggested tile. So on the homepage of Firefox, they're going to have these little squares, 8 to 12 squares. And it's somewhat of an advertisement platform. I say somewhat, but I guess it is an advertisement platform. And what advertisements are shown is based upon your browser history. Now, there's going to be some privacy issues here, obviously, and Mozilla is well aware of this. So they're taking what precautions they can, but it is still a very controversial feature. Anytime you get advertising, it runs at odds with privacy issues. So I got to think that Mozilla probably put a lot of thought into how to maintain privacy protection for their users while allowing a revenue stream like at advertising. I just don't know in the long term. One, did they get it right in the near term? Maybe, maybe not, and I'm sure they'll figure that out. But I'm not sure this is sustainable in the long term when it comes to privacy. I mean, the dollars are going to win out over their users' privacy. What do you think, Robert?
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because they're sort of making homage to the fact that they take users' privacy very seriously, and to their credit, they actually have been on the forefront and have made some pretty draconian decisions in a good way from the user's privacy perspective. But this just seems like a gigantic step backwards. I mean, the funny thing is they say this is for the user, and it's not at all for the user. Users don't want this at all. But they do have a good point. I mean, buried deep in their in their marketing message, because it's a very marketing-heavy message, that there needs to be a better way to advertise. There needs to be a better way to monetize the internet. And maybe this is a way to reduce the amount of stuff that you're willing to share. So the way I've read their platform is going to work, it's going to phone home when it sees one of a certain sets of websites. So there's going to be a sort of, I would imagine, like some kind of master list somewhere that if they see you hitting these particular URLs, they will phone home and say, okay, we've seen them go to these 5 car sites, so they're car buyers or whatever. And so then you surface a tile related to car buying or whatever. So that's a little less bad than the whole cookie method, but ultimately it kind of is still a cookie method. It's just a different way, different implementation of it. I don't know.
Yeah, so the couple of questions I had is, one, can the user turn this off? And perhaps even more importantly, what's the default setting? Do users automatically enrolled in this, or do they have to turn it on? And I think that default setting is very important. And if it's default on, I mean, I don't know if Mozilla's coming down on the right side of privacy on that one.
I completely agree. And that is their intention, is to have it default on. And it's supposed to be easy to turn off, but I've looked at their proposed way to do that, and it's one of those things where you'd kind of have to know that it's something you'd want to turn off in the process of doing that. So pretty unlikely that that's going to be something that people will be disabling.
So Mozilla makes a ton of money, well, previously from Google, I think now from Yahoo, right? Because they shifted over the default search. I wonder what their revenue projections are going to be for this type of advertising platform. I mean, they have hundreds of millions of users, and to be able to layer ads in that environment has got to be pretty lucrative.
Yeah, and they're claiming that they can put rich media in there as well. So, I mean, I would imagine what we're going to start seeing there is like movies and like all kinds of super annoying things like animated whatever. So, I mean, it's going to be easy to remove. It's going to be easy to disable. So guys like us probably won't even notice. But for the average consumer, this is definitely going to be default on privacy invading technology from my perspective.
And the other thing I think about is this like a really a requested feature on behalf of the users? I mean, were users really clamoring for this, that they had to have this, or is this really a feature more for Mozilla to make money? And again, nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't seem to me like the user populace wanted it. If they're looking for a different revenue model, man, I would kill for a micropayment system baked into the browser. That would be really cool.
Yeah, and you're not the first person to say that. I think that actually has a lot more promise long term. But you get into all kinds of interesting issues around how secure the browser is when you have micropayments.
If it's a secure product, they should be able to, the platform is secure. If the browser is secure, great. Let's do the micropayment system.
And we all know it isn't.
All right, so there's that. So Mozilla's going to do that. We'll keep a close eye on it. But there was another paper relating to privacy and tracker protection, and this paper came about at the Web 2.0 Security and Privacy Conference, the 2015 one. And this particular paper, even though it's really cool from Robert and I's perspective, it actually won, like, I think the best paper of the event. Mm-hmm. And here's the punchline. And this was in part done by a researcher named Monica Chu. And it said, when surfing with Firefox on the top Alexa websites, the top traffic websites, with tracking protection enabled on the top news sites, it reduced load, traffic, and bandwidth by 44%. That was pretty huge. So beyond all the privacy stuff, when you use tracker protection, you get seriously increased performance. So that's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we already knew that, though. I mean, we've been tracking that kind of stuff for quite a while. But it's great to see Mozilla owning up to it. Now they agree, too.
And what was also interesting, and I hate to say conspiracy theory and get into all the drama aspect, but I think Monica and maybe some others, that was their last work at Mozilla, and then they left. Like, that was their work. And from the comments I was reading, it seems like there's a lot of infighting at Mozilla on the direction of the organization, those that are really strong towards privacy and don't want to give in to advertising, and the stake in the business, what the business needs to do to keep growing and keep making money, and what else do they got except ads?
That's right. Maybe phones. Maybe.
But yeah, so we'll see where Mozilla goes. I mean, they got some steep competition still. You got Google with Chrome. You got Microsoft with their new Project Spartan. Did they name their new browser yet? Is there an official name?
I think they did, and now I'm spacing on it. I thought, yeah, it's not Spartan anymore. It's something else. Can't remember.
All right, so let's go back. Let's go back to more security stuff. So we did the hacks, we did the privacy stuff. So White Hat, one thing we do once, maybe twice a year, is what we call the Website Security Statistics Report. And at White Hat, we do vulnerability assessments. So our customers hire us to find vulnerabilities in their websites and scan the same websites and do assessments on it all the time throughout the duration of a year. So we actually have some pretty awesome data on who's vulnerable to what and how often. And we do aggregate statistics on our findings. So our most recent report was released last week. It was a gargantuan amount of effort. And we found some really interesting stats. But the core of this report, because we always theme it a little different, while we have great outcome-based metrics, in terms of vulnerabilities, we know how many vulnerabilities of what kind, we know how long they take to get fixed, we know, we call it time to fix, and we know remediation rates, what percentage of them that gets fixed. But one of the things that we're still kind of blind to as an industry is what organizations do internally in their software development lifecycle to achieve those outcomes, good, bad, or otherwise. Do they do developer training? If so, how often? Do they do security testing during QA? If so, how often? And 1,000 other quote-unquote best practices, and how those affect the outcomes. So it's really difficult to say developer training is good, it makes your metrics improve, because there hasn't been a whole lot of data. So one of the things we did is we listed out about 16 to 18 survey questions and asked our customers, do you do training? Do you do adversarial QA testing? And a whole bunch of other things. Have you been hacked? Who's accountable in the organization? And then performed a regression analysis based on those survey answers with the outcomes. And so we were able to get a tie between security controls and vulnerability outcomes, and it was pretty fascinating. Now, the links will be in the summary, but here's the punchline when it's all said and done. What we found is that there really isn't anything that you would equate to being a best practice, something that every company should do in whatever situation to improve any metric. We really didn't find that. The closest we found was that when companies have, wherever they get their vulnerability data from, whether it's a pen tester, a white hat, a scanning tool, and they wired those results directly into their bug tracking system for developers, only then do we see a huge increase across the board on all metrics. It lowered vulns, it sped up time to fix, increased remediation rates. Like if you did nothing else, that's the safe bet, wiring vulnerability assessment data into the bug tracking systems. All the other activities from training to QA testing and things like that seem to positively affect one or two very particular metrics, but not all three. So the strategy that we think works in AppSec is to really first understand your AppSec program's metrics and to do the activity that's most likely going to make the impact there. So I'll stop there. I talked a lot. So Robert, you read the report. What'd you see?
Yeah, I think that's actually the most fundamental thing. That whole, is there a best practice, I think is a really important thing for people to understand. Because people use that word, they throw it around a lot. And I think what we were basically finding is there's just no such thing. I mean, there's a lot of really great things that you can do, and any one of them might be great in a vacuum with no other, things going on inside of a big enough company. But given the ecosystem, given how many moving parts there are, there's no such thing as a best practice anymore, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's going to rub people the wrong way because they sell training. We sell training. They sell training.
It's not like training's a bad thing. It's just, if you're doing training, what metric are you thinking it's going to improve? If you're just doing training to satisfy a checkbox, it's not going to do anything. If the core of your AppSec program's challenges is that if your time to fix or your remediation rate is too low or time to fix is too long, and the reason is because developers don't know how to fix these issues, then training is going to work. But if those metrics aren't improving because the business hasn't decided to prioritize those fixes, and the developers know how to fix it, training is not going to work. They already know how. So that you have to be very, very strategic in how you go about this stuff. You just can't waste money endlessly. The other one that I thought was pretty cool is we have this metric called window of exposure. The assumption is that if a bad guy wants to hack a system or hack a user on a system, they only need one vulnerability to do it. So how many days in a given year is the system vulnerable to at least one serious issue where bad things can happen? And so here's where it gets kind of spooky. So we looked at retail websites versus healthcare versus financial services. 55% of retail websites had at least one serious issue exposed every single day of 2014. Every single day. Yep. Right around 10 to 15% or so of retail sites had a serious vulnerability exposed less than 30 days of the year. So, and it was similar in finance. So finance, about 1/3 were vulnerable every single day. About 10 to 15% or so were not, and everybody fell in the middle. But what we found is that there's some people that can do it right and some people that are still struggling. We're trying to figure out the differences between them. But one thing that really stood clear is that when we looked at all the vulnerabilities, when we looked at all the hacks from the Verizon data breach report, we know everything about these vulnerabilities. We know how to find them, we know how to fix them, we know how to prevent them. And it seems to me that the answer to AppSec are non-technical answers. Are really, we know all the right answers, we know the things to do. Are we just going to get off our butts and do them as an industry? Is really what it comes down to. I think that should give us optimism that we have the answers available to us. We're just lacking the motivation and perhaps even the incentive to do the right thing.
Yep, I totally agree.
So it's a highly recommended read. It's freely available. Share it around. We make it available to everybody. So it's a lot of fun.
A lot of work.
It's so much work. Piling through terabytes of data, trying to find the signal in all the noise. All right, got the stats report out of the way. Let's go through one more story. This is the one that, anytime you ever meet people and you tell them what you do, you say you're a hacker, you break stuff like that, and among the questions, can you hack a bank? Or can you hack the IRS is the other one. So anytime there's an IRS hack, everybody takes notice. So according to the news reports, there's about 100,000, I guess, users or people on the IRS.gov system that had their information exposed. Actually, I think it's 200,000 was tried, but the data was only revealed for 100,000. So how much did you look into this story, Robert?
A little bit. They're still keeping a lot of the data under wraps of how it happened. But my speculation is they hacked it through probably something like Zeus, had all the information they needed, and just built some little Selenium script or something equivalent, right? Something that they could issue tons and tons and tons of requests, funneled it through a bunch of proxies or Tor or hack machines or whatever, and just filed a lot of taxes on people's tax returns, and then funneled the money back out from the government to somewhere else, probably Eastern Europe.
So there's a ton of IRS hacking stories, but the one I was looking into was pretty non-technical. Actually, they used a feature on the website. So there's a feature called Get Applications on the IRS website as I was reading about it. And what the bad guys did was they used previously stolen personal information, a person's social security number, name, their address, and things like that. And sometimes when you want to get, for a variety of reasons, you want to get all your old tax return information from years back, which have all your salary information, past addresses, and things like that. So the bad guys used personal information that they had attained previously, went to the website, posed to somebody else, and started downloading all their data from a completely legit feature. So one is, I don't say that these were hackers. These are more cyber criminals. And I can't even say that the IRS was hacked. It was a feature on their website that they have since turned off and said sorry. But there's 100,000 people or so that had their information stolen, and the IRS says about 15,000 of those people had fraudulent tax returns filed to extract money.
Right.
And so we can expect a lot more identity theft, if we like to use that term, and credit fraud and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I was just looking at it and going like, why are we still using social security numbers as identifiers? Like, really? We can't do better than this? I mean, numbers are free. Come on, yeah. Numbers are free.
Yeah, this is pretty bad. This will have a lot of downstream implications. But the thing that Brian Krebs published related to Robert E. Lee and one other guy from Intuit, it gives a good indication of how big this fraud can get. I mean, they were pumping something like $4 billion US through Intuit in illegal tax returns, allegedly, right? We don't know for a fact that's happened, but allegedly that's the case. So this is big, big cyber criminal business. And when you're talking about numbers that big, it really has to be a criminal like gang, or it has to be a government. I mean, there's, individuals just not going to be able to push that kind of money around.
I guess one of the bad guys are going to go where the money is, and I think I was reading on the New York Times story about this, that the IRS collects something like $2.4 trillion in taxes. So, who's going to miss $4 billion?
I'll take 10% of that.
And then 200,000 web requests and I think the IRS said 24 million Americans had used that feature on the site, the Get App feature. I mean, I was kind of astonished that they even noticed.
Yeah, me too, actually.
I was thinking to myself, okay, what tools were they using to even notice this? They said a spike in activity, but I'm thinking like an automated script to do this stuff in a pool of 24 million. The bad guys might have been a little bit careless, or the IRS had some pretty cool defense.
Yeah, maybe both. Yeah. Doesn't take much to do IP correlations, so maybe they found some signal in the noise, or a non-standard user agent, or something else they could correlate on. Who knows?
But it is pretty powerful that when people's personal information, like their social security numbers, are stolen from one source to be leveraged on another source. I mean, maybe that's why all the bad guys are going after the medical system, because they can get it's an easy target. They get a whole bunch of personal information, and then they go leverage it elsewhere.
Yep.
All right. So that's our stories for the day for this week's HackerKast. If you like what we're doing here, please rate, please subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. And thanks, everybody. See you next time.
See ya.